But let's start with the cracking the product sense interview, right? And I think this is the agenda for the session. The first is like, what is the relevance of product sense for PMs? Now, you know the relevance of product sense in interviews, but I want you to first focus on why are people so high on product sense when it comes to interviews? Like it is almost omnipresent. Like every startup, every big tech company that you go, they, even if there is no tech round or data round or business round, there is definitely a product sense, product thinking, product judgment round. So why is it so important for PMs? It's very important to understand that, because unless you understand the fundamentals, you won't be able to build over it, right? So just knowing that it is relevant for interviews versus why it is relevant for interviews makes a lot of difference in how you approach these interviews, and also lets you see connections on these among these interviews across companies. Because the bigger problem that has happened in the industry is you are being told that if you're going for Meta product sense interview, this is how you should prepare. If you're going for Google product sense interview, this is how you should prepare. If you're going for Microsoft product sense interview, this is how you should prepare. And we have almost sort of created silos of product management courses, which actually sort of talk about how to prepare for Meta, how to prepare for Microsoft, how to prepare for Google. And it takes a lot of toll on aspiring PMs as well as existing PMs, because you are confused now among the sea of noises on what to do, because product sense is product sense. There's no Meta product sense and Google product sense and Microsoft product sense, right? So that's why going to relevance of product sense is very, very important. The second thing is now unwrapping that in sort of big tech. How does big tech sort of evaluate your product sense? Which is slightly more evolved than startup criteria for product sense. And both are very different, by the way. Then we talk about the basic ingredients of product sense. Frameworks is something you already know, but we'll also talk about more things. And finally, we talk about where the magic happens in product sense interviews. Like how do you make it more magical, much more stronger? And then we'll take some questions, right? So first thing first, let me understand my audience so that I can sort of modify my pitch and what I share accordingly. I'll just launch a poll. So the poll is how many years of PM experience do you have? I'm talking about PM experience. 0 year is aspiring PMs. Less than a year is new PMs. You have become a PM, but you have less than a year experience. 2 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, 10 plus years. Now those of you who have voted, let me ask a question to you. If I had asked you that I'm conducting a cracking of product sense interview sort of session, what is the percentage of aspiring PM to existing PMs would you see in this session? Just take a stab. You know the market, right? The market of aspiring PMs and the pain for them when it comes to preparing for interviews versus existing PMs and the pain for them when preparing for interviews.
I think I'd
95%,
say 80% are like aspiring PMs
80%.
probably.
Put
Yeah.
it in chat on your behalf, but okay, 80% aspiring. 30% aspiring. Aviral has gone, maybe like opposite to the trend. 80-20, 80-20, 70, 30, 90. And 30. Tini has said 30% aspiring. Tini, is that 30% aspiring or 30% existing? Just put the clarification down. 50-50, 70. Awesome, right? And this is something that where, product sense does not help. Like, I tend to believe that I have good product sense, but let me show you the poll. Can you see it? 6% aspiring PMs, 94% existing PMs. I actually didn't. If you had asked me to take a bet, I would not have said this. But as it turns out, I'm not that popular in aspiring PMs. Right? So, yeah, that's the power of positioning. Priyanka has raised a hand. Priyanka, you could just put it in chat if possible, because otherwise, I think a lot of people start raising hand and that creates a lot of problems for me. Okay. Let's go back. I think there is another poll at the end of the session where you can rate the session. But yeah, I'm not going to do a lot of polls here. Now, let's do one thing. Actually, I don't want to. Okay, my bad. I don't want to sort of put the whole slides in one go. So I think I also put a question around what do you struggle around cracking the product sense interviews, right? The first thing that I got is actually not the first thing. These are some of the common struggles. And one is like not being able to ascertain what is the right strategy to approach among multiple options available, right? Then confidence in the approach taken due to lack of surety, if that is the best way to go ahead. I would say this question is closest to uh, actually being a very strong PM. Like any PM who feels like this, like not being able to ascertain what is the right strategy. Because see, the kernel of strategy is any good strategy is a good strategy as long as the opposite of that strategy is also a good strategy. So if you're being super confident that this is the only right strategy, you're violating one of the fundamental principles of strategy, right? Now that we have like existing PMs here more, so I can go slightly, I can make these remarks slightly more comfortable, but I will touch upon like deeper levels of product sense, even when we are covering simple feedback and all, right? So be ready for that. Be also ready to post your comments and questions so that I can pick it from the chat. But anyway, so this is very good, right? Because if you are very confident when it comes to product sense, there is a good chance that your product sense is not great. So confidence is like up to a certain level, like it's actually good. But beyond a certain level, confidence in decisions and all, like if you're being super confident that this is the right decision, this is the right strategy, there's a good chance you don't have a very good product sense, right? So PMs with strong product sense actually tend to say that I'm 70% confident that this is the right thing we are looking at. I'm 80% confident, 90% confident, but they never say that, oh, I'm very sure that this is how it should be, right? Just like great investors, they're not sure. Then the second comment was like, I struggle with B2B versus B2C case study answer structure. And we will see why there is a difference between B2B and B2C. Quickly think about creative ideas and edge cases. Again, this, like at the surface, this feels like a creativity problem. But as you go deeper into the stuff that I share, you'll realize that this could arise from like 2 or 3 totally unrelated things rather than like anything to do with creativity and all, right? So for example, this has to do a lot with practice. So practice is an obvious candidate, but then there are some non-obvious candidates also. Ability to understand domain comprehensively, right? Is studying competitors the only way to gain domain knowledge? And that's a great question, right? Like how do you understand a domain? And when we say domain, it usually comprises of not just competition, it also comprises of the ecosystem. It also comprises of the consumer trends and all that. How do you get all that knowledge? And finally, like how to judge if someone has product sense. So here I will just lend this question back to like Shreyas, who said something which has stuck with me since, like if somebody does not have a strong product sense, it will be very hard for them to judge if someone else has a strong product sense, right? And this is where like the problem lies. This is very, very akin to, EdTech courses. Like the person who is going to learn, they don't know what is the right syllabus and what should they learn to actually become better. And that's why like any course which relies upon, let's say, ratings from learners, like is slightly faulty on the product sense, because the learners actually don't know what they should learn and how they should learn and all that. If they knew, they would not come to you. And which is where like more like experts, founders, people who have been like in that domain for long are actually the true markers of whether a particular course is good or not. And similarly, like in product sense, people who have gotten that product sense can only judge if somebody else has a product sense. But that said, there is another lens to look at this, which I would say still works. Like I will slightly disagree with Shreyas there and sort of say that there is a way to actually judge if somebody has a product sense. And that is how many times do you get in awe with while discussing with that person when it comes to product, right? So getting in awe like this was one of the things I sort of keep a track of when I interact with people. They say something and I'm like, wow, I've never thought that. I have not gone through that experience. I've never even considered this thing. And that is an indicator of product sense, right? People who tend to have strong product sense, they will tell about unobvious ideas. They will talk about unobvious sort of insights, right? So the novelty of insights from a person is also indication of product sense. And I'm sure a lot of you relate to that. Say yes in the chat if you relate to that, right? Priyanka has this question. Wouldn't it be subjective? Priyanka, could you come forward and explain this question so that I can take it now?
Yeah, Deepak. So basically, when you mentioned that, when you're in awe when someone is putting forth an idea, but then it would be subjective based on your own knowledge.
I agree.
So,
I agree. So,
right? So, yeah.
so you are the baseline, of course, right? And if you're just a newbie in product, you would have a lot of awe moment. That just signifies that somebody has a better product sense than you. So that's a better way of putting it. Not like in absolute sense, they have a much stronger product sense. So yeah, that's a good call out. Thank you for calling that out. Does that make sense? Okay. Relevance. So now the relevance of product sense rounds, right? And I have this habit of, trying to reduce the number of frameworks and number of jargons and everything, because I feel that simplifies any domain. And that is possibly the only way to move that domain forward, right? So feel free to stop me if I'm trying to complicate things. Feel free to point out if there are some obvious sort of assumptions taken, because honestly, like the content that I'm sharing does not come from another framework. Like I'm not modifying another framework. I'm just trying to sort of reason out from first principles based on my learnings across companies. And there are gaps in my learnings in the sense, for example, I've never worked at Google. I've never worked at Meta. I've interviewed for them and I understand like what they look for it. I have been successful there as well, at least one time. But at the same time, I don't know what happens inside. I have not interviewed lead PMs for Meta by being in Meta, right? So feel free to sort of point things out. Feel free to say that somewhere we are complicating things, and we will sort of have a discussion, honest discussion, and we'll move forward by learning from each other. So without much ado, let's dive in, right? So the role of a PM is to actually make decisions. If you look at like what a PM is doing on a day-to-day basis to add a lot of value to a company, that is making decisions. You can say execution is another thing, but execution is incremental. I mean, what are you going to execute by moving something 20% faster? The jump is 20% faster only, right? And of course, you can always argue that in decades that 20% adds up and compounds and all that, but still incremental, right? Unless you take a 10-year long horizon, that does not compounds and become non-linear. But when it comes to decisions, the decisions made by PMs actually can have a non-linear impact, because that can make a difference between minus 30% and plus 50% jump in a particular metric, right? So the decisions that PM take are based on multiple things: quantitative data, surveys, user interviews, competitor moves, market trends, and all that. Now, what you don't know is which data is relevant for this decision and how do you collate data across these sources, right? And which is where like it makes the PM a very, very ill-structured, a very, very wicked domain, right? So ill-structured means there is no structure to these decisions. Wicked means that decision that you took yesterday might be a wrong decision today because the market has changed or competition has changed, right? So it's a wicked domain. It's not a kind domain like writing. When you write something, it's still ill-structured because there's no structure around it. But a good writing, if you give it to like 5 people, they can read it and they can say that, wow, you just amazed me. A good writing is kind. A good writing is kind, but investing or product management decisions are not kind, right? You'd only know after you sort of have made the investment and waited for a long time. You would only know after you have shipped a feature and waited for a long time that you actually created a lot of impact or you didn't, right? So it's an ill-structured, wicked domain because you have to keep all of these in mind. And then there are more factors, right? And which is the crux of product sense? Product sense is the ability to make right decisions around which changes or initiatives would bring most value to users in business. And when I say most value, I also mean not just in short run, but also in long run. For example, I'll give you a very, very simple example. Yesterday, while researching around like product sense, cracking the product sense interview, I stumbled upon this product, and I will not name which claimed like, let's say, 100% cohort placement in aspiring PM interviews. And just out of curiosity, because that seems very far-fetched to me. I have good friends who have been trying to do that. Like Mona is trying to do that. Arindam is trying to do that. And like these companies, and I have done that at Upgrad. I actually sort of contributed to building the product management course and all. So I think I have seen this industry changing and the struggles with it. And which is why like I just went on and looked at like some of the profiles which had taken the course a year back or so. And they're still not PMs, right? So that claim, for example, is that the right decision for bringing most value to users in business? In the short run, yes. In the short run, it can sort of bring a lot of revenue. But in the long run, no. Because in the long run, as your base expands, people will start talking about it. And so the ability to make right decisions about which changes or initiatives will bring most value to users and business in the short run and in the long run. And sometimes like the short run is at the expense of long run and long run is at expense of short run. That is the product sense, right? A very simple, I'm not going to teach you how to become good at product sense. We are going to focus on cracking the product sense interview. So let's take an example. Let's take a question which is pretty popular, which is how should Airbnb tackle challenges presented to its business during COVID-19? So this will be the central case that we will have. And as I talk about more and more things, we'll try to see how they help in solving this problem in a product sense interviews. So the first thing is, when it comes to gauging product sense in interviews. Now, see, in daily life, you can look at people's decision. Like Amazon has this framework of leaders are right a lot. Like they make the decision and they have a good, consistent hit rate of success. But you can't do that in an interview. Interview is like just 30 minutes of your time. And so how does a seasoned PM actually evaluates you in interviews is very, very important to understand. So the first thing that they look at is, can you provide structure to an unstructured problem? Airbnb tackling challenges during COVID-19 is an unstructured problem. Can you provide structure to it? For example, can you say that Airbnb has basically three parts of its business? One is Airbnb, the entity itself. One is basically the hosts, and then there are guests, right? You have just added a structure to an unstructured problem. And then you can study the impact of basically COVID on host mindset and their willingness to travel, their willingness to accommodate, and guest mindset and their willingness to travel and all that. But right now you have just broken down a structure, right? So can you provide structure to the unstructured problem? That's one thing they're looking to see. And why? Because without structure, you can't explain your thinking and decision-making process well. Now, it's not just relevant from an interview perspective. It's also relevant because in your day-to-day job, you as a PM are talking to developers, you as a PM are talking to sort of business, you are talking to marketers. If you can't structure and explain your thinking and decision-making well, you can't be relied upon to actually create a good impact, right? So that's the second thing that they're looking for. The third thing they're looking for is, can you identify the core problems? For example, when it comes to COVID, somebody might say that people are scared of getting infected. Now that's a good problem, but what is the crux of problem for Airbnb when it comes to that? Because unless you go to the crux of problem, of course, people are scared to get infected. But the problem with Airbnb is that its business is getting affected, and how can it support its hosts and guests to actually sort of maintain a decent business, right? That's the crux of the problem. And if you're just talking about general things, which we keep talking on a day-to-day basis, that is not going to solve that problem, because those are very obvious things. So can you identify the core problems quickly? That's the third thing that you're looking at. The fourth is, then can you inspire confidence? That is the term, right? You can go through circles and you can propose a solution, but can you inspire confidence in the problem diagnosis and solution? That's the fourth thing that you look at. And finally, can you quantify success or failure for others to see it? If you look at all the frameworks, all they are doing is they're providing a structure so that you can explain your thinking and decision making. And they ask you to talk about the core problems, core customer problems, core business problems. Then they talk about like prioritizing those problems. Then they talk about like solution. Then they talk about metrics, right? Every framework out there is a derivative of this. But the reason product sense is so important for PMs is because in your real job, you are actually supposed to do all five. You're supposed to provide structure. You're supposed to explain it well. You're supposed to prioritize what to pick first because you have limited engineering bandwidth. You're supposed to inspire confidence. And then finally, you're supposed to quantify success or failure so that others can actually see it and say that, yeah, this team launched something which actually contributed to success for Airbnb. So product sense is a simulation of your real job as a PM. And that's why it's a very, very important interview, right? Once you understand that, you start tackling product sense not just from a purview of just sort of cracking the interviews. You start sort of tackling product sense from a purview of how do I become a better person, a better PM with a strong product sense. Because if you become that, the next thing is very, very easy. The next thing is like just a piece of cake, cracking the interviews, right? Now, the good thing is the preparation for interviews and preparation for becoming a good, like having a good product sense are actually like aligned, right? Because both are one on the same thing. Like I said, it's a simulation of the real job. So what works in real job also works in interviews, just in a slightly sort of modified format. Before moving, I'll just look at the questions. I think Shifia has posted this good thing, which I'm going to answer through this PPT only. Your definition of product sense makes a lot of sense. But in real life PM, research about market, competition, customers, pain points to make decisions. But during interviews, we are expected to think at depth about everything in about 35 minutes, which I feel is a big challenge. Shifia, we are going to exactly tackle that challenge because that separates like excellence in product sense interviews versus like just applying the framework, which I would say aspiring PM who is smart enough can also do. So what's the differentiation of a lead PM or a director of product when they are going into a product sense interview versus a aspiring PM, if both are just applying the framework and trying to solve that problem in 30 minutes, right? So that's one of the key things that we are going to address. And for the aspiring PMs out there, by the way, like if you understand this carefully, like you can very quickly differentiate yourself from the others, because others are just sort of trying to practice on the frameworks they are taught. But you'll have a much richer conversation with the interviewer when it comes to product sense. All right. So let's quickly cover like the biggest criteria for product sense, a big tech criteria for product sense, my bad. So Meta, for example, let's go after Meta, then Google, and then Microsoft, right? These three are very different interviews. And then there is Amazon, but Amazon actually has more of a behavioral interview. You can read more about it, but it has more of a business sense, I would say, which you can blend product and business to create much stronger business sense. It relies more on business sense than product sense, like when it comes to Amazon, and it relies very, very heavily on behavioral interview, which is why I have not covered Amazon here. So in Meta, like if you look at Meta has created this set of documents or even videos on how you should do the product sense interviews, right? And it is looking for you to take an ambiguous idea and refine it, which is providing structure. Your ability to empathize with the user, which is problem diagnosis, right? See, a lot of people actually struggle with, user empathy because it's such a subjective term. But ultimately, user empathy is nothing but problem diagnosis. Like if I ask you to chat with somebody and tell you that I want to know top 3 problems they're facing in their life, how do you approach it? Like that is basically the user empathy, which is a derivative of problem diagnosis, right? So intentional design choices, again, these are like decisions. And of course, like if you know some design principles better, you can make better decisions. That goes without saying. But at the fundamental level, this is about decision making. Prioritization to get things done. And then should Facebook be focused on it? Like if they're asking a question around designing a parking lot, the last one is not relevant. Should Facebook be focused on designing a parking lot? No. But if they're talking about Reels, I think you should tackle the question on whether it's relevant for Facebook or not, right? So that is more of like decision making and prioritization for a particular company in context of the problem that they are doing, right? And Meta actually advocates their way of interviewing pretty well, right? Which is where like you can find a lot of literature around it. But the major point is not that. The major point is if you look at Google, Google also looks at structure, empathy, design choices, but along with that, they add something else to the mix, which is creativity, right? And this creativity keeps coming back in multiple things that they assess. Prioritization to get things done, moonshots, which is like, can you think big? Can you think of $100 billion business opportunity or 1 billion active users opportunity for Google, right? Or can you at least think $1 billion business opportunity and 100 million active users for Google, right? Can you think big? Because that is where they're testing your creativity and problem solving. Like Google, and the reason for that is because Google has fundamentally been that company which has always taken people who are very creative and try to throw them to a particular domain or problems, right? That is what their strength is. So that is why they evaluate people like that. And then finally, should Google do it? Again, problem solving and creativity again comes into picture. But Google sort of banks a lot on, can you unblock your mind from the framework and say that, oh, we should do this because this will be so awesome. They want you to go there, right? For example, when you're talking about a smart chair, they want you to do 2 things. One is like, go to the far-fetched end of smart, what smart means when it comes to a chair. And they also want you to think around, how would Google make a smart chair better, right? And by the way, this is not just common to Google. This is like in lead interviews, at least. Like in product sense, they want you to evaluate problem in context of the company if they have provided the context of the company, right? They want you to evaluate whether Meta should be doing it, because that is the crux of the decision when you make the decision in the real life, right? So here again, this is something a lot of interviewees miss. And the reason is because they feel interviews are different than job. But in actuality, what separates a great interview, product sense interview, from a good product sense interview is actually if you create like more real lifeness to the interview, which is like, can you like think big for what matters for Google? Can you think big enough so that at the scale of Google, it actually matters? Because if you don't do that, Google feels that you are not going to succeed in their organization in making it big, right? Microsoft is slightly different. By the way, like today's Microsoft is very different than Microsoft 10 years back. So whatever I'm saying, like take it with a pinch of salt and definitely verify with your friends at Microsoft. But at the core of it, Microsoft is no matter what people say, it's actually very dedicated to customer experience and communication. So it's a big org. So which is why they want to see whether you can communicate very well. And they also are very, very finicky about the experience of their enterprise customers or B2B customers, right? So in fact, like you will see no other company where PMs actually go and sit on a call with a potential sort of client or potential customer. Microsoft is a company where actually PMs come on those calls and they try to explain you the value prop and everything. It's part of the job description, right? And they want to see if you have that sort of DNA, right? Again, problem solving is very, very important for Microsoft because it has built such a complex platform, right? And to build platform products, right, as compared to, let's say, a B2C feature or something, you need to have very good problem solving ability. You need to understand the complexity of the product. You need to figure out a solution that sort of navigates that complexity and all that, right? So which is why they look at problem solving. Do you understand platform product management? Do you understand tech and business domains and all that? But barring that, ultimately every company is looking for you to provide structure, to communicate well, and to prioritize and do XYZ. So the core of the product sense is the same. The only thing that is getting added as a layer is what sort of traits is that company looking for, right? So few things that you need to focus in big tech beyond the core framework is mission and vision of that company. Definitely read through it. Current focus areas in their competitive positioning. Like in today's era, if you go into an interview with no understanding of generative AI, I think it might hurt your chances big time. Because one of the key questions every company is going to ask is, what is the technology you're most excited about? And if you can't offer something beyond the LinkedIn posts that we keep reading, they are not going to feel that you are very good, like you are very interested in technology, which is the prereq of becoming a very strong PM in technology, right? So don't take it like I have to prepare it because they ask in interviews. The reason they ask in interviews is because you as a PM need to have a strong technical acumen, need to have a deep interest in technology to build actually good products, actually superior products. So they are just gauging that. But the problem that has happened is we have gotten onto a hacking mode where we just try to tick these boxes and get away with it, right? And then the third thing is look at broad attributes they're looking for in this interview. We saw that Google banks high on creativity or googliness. Microsoft banks high on platform and complexity. Meta banks high on analytical mindset and a lot of metric-driven sort of culture. So be very, very clear on what they're looking for. Try to push that in your answers because that will help you a lot. Okay, time for quick check. I think there are no questions, so I'll move. Now, startup criteria is different, right? So startup criteria mein what matters most to understand is mission and vision, current focus areas, and unique attributes of founders and product leads. Because it's a small team, the culture is almost always the culture that these people have in their heads and in their personalities, right? So when it comes to startup, which is why you need to be very, very careful because the leadership does not have a lot of time to mentor. You have a very short window to prove that the org should invest in you and they should listen to you. And then finally, like every startup is very different. So I think I would just say that definitely look at the cultural aspect and what makes, like, does it align with your values? Does it align with your sort of strengths? Because if it doesn't, no matter how good you are, you'll struggle to make an impact in a startup, right? So this is like the general gyan. But majorly, if you look at the product sense interviews in startup, they're fundamentally different because, eventually people are actually gauging more of like, do you have high ownership? Do you complain less? Do you have high energy and ambition? And can you do things 0 to 1? Like, do you think in terms of markets? Do you think in terms of consumers or not? They are not very finicky about, did you follow the structure to cover all these things? Because what matters more to them is the energy, ambition, and drive, along with like the zeal to make a difference in a particular market or customer segment, is way, way higher than the actual skills, right? So the actual skills can be learned because you have the energy, ambition, and drive, but they can't teach you energy, ambition, and drive, which is why these become the filtering criteria. So even if you have very good interviewing skills, you have done you have done very well in sort of these big company interviews, a startup can still reject you because they don't see energy, ambition, and drive. And you might be feeling, oh, my product sense interview didn't go well because I don't know, like I'm not able to think why it didn't go well with the startup. But the thing is, they're not just determining. See, ultimately, it all ties back to that central thing. They are trying to evaluate whether you can make an impact at that company or not. And Depending on that, something or something else matters more for that company. For startups, energy, ambition, and drive matters more than skills, right? So be very careful in that. Right. And when I say startup, I think that there's this question, which is like, when you say startup, what does it mean? I would say like it's anywhere between seed stage to unicorn stage. Beyond unicorn, like Razorpay, Zomato, Flipkart, they're at like 7-8 billion and all that. Like pre-unicorn stage is what I'm talking about. Like it could be at $900 million valuation, it could be at 700, it could be at 7 million. But yeah, after unicorn stage, like things change. Even then, they actually value, like if my time at Unacademy sort of shows that they still value energy, ambition, and these things more than the skills, because they feel skills can be taught. And Unacademy is what, like a $3.5 billion company. So it still matters, but of course, like more stable orgs with like 200, 300, 400 PMs, like Flipkart, Razorpay, and all, they are more stable. They are more banking on like skills and all, and they're also looking at a little bit of energy, ambition, and drive, right? So, by the way, like if you are interviewing with one of the early stage, so for example, even in Flipkart, if you go and you talk to some of the people who were since like 2012 and 2013, they still value energy, ambition, and drive, because that's like inculcated in their DNA. Same for like, so any founder that you talk to, they would always sort of bank upon this more than the skills, because they feel that is what it takes to actually truly build 0 to 1 products and truly create value out of nothing. Right. So definitely sort of. And another good question from Venkat is, what metrics would startup use to gauge our energy, ambition, and drive? Is it number of projects worked on? So most of the times they would look at how enthusiastically you talk about what you have done so far. And they will grill on one of the projects, right? So they will look at what you have done so far, because that is a far better indicator of what a person you are as compared to what you promise to do or what you feel you should be doing and all that, right? Now, what you have done so far is not just limited to your products that you have built. It is actually like how you have been through your college, how you have been through your school days. What is your life story? Like one of the things which possibly impresses a lot of interviewers when it come to me, and at the risk of sounding slightly self-promotional, but I'll share that because it might help you understand deeply what it means. So one of the things that I think I've seen the brightness in the eyes of interviewers when it comes to like when I share with them that I always wanted to write a book, and that's why like even if nobody recommended that I should be writing a book at the age of 30, I still wrote a book, right? Or when I tell them that I come from a very, very small village in Bihar where at least for the first 15 years of my life, there was no electricity. So that sort of like that story in itself is convincing enough for people to say that, okay, if you can move from that place to this place, then possibly like what you say is right. So rather than telling that I'm very passionate about education, I think what I like telling is how has education actually impacted my life and the life of those around me. And that is a much more convincing story, because you can't contradict that story. That's the story you have lived, right? So try to focus on your stories, try to focus on your life stories, college stories, work stories. When it comes to startup, they tend to value a lot more around that. And of course, that does not mean that you start your story and start telling it for next 10 minutes. You have to sort of gauge the audience. You have to talk about it maybe 30 to 60 seconds and then stop, whether they want to know more or whether. So all those basic things should be there. But that said, like try to like that if they can sense that genuineness in the energy and drive that you have in general in your life, I think they would be happy to give you an offer, even if you don't have the best skills available. Now let's come to basic ingredients, and we are already at 11:53. So I'll take 10 minutes to cover this, right? The first thing is circles method. So this is something that you already know. Comprehend the situation, identify a customer, report customer needs, prioritize, list solution, evaluate trade-offs, and then summarize recommendation. It's not very different from what I told you also, right? The only thing that I told you differently is why a certain company evaluates a products and surround differently as compared to some other company, right? And why does that vary between a startup and a big tech? And why does that even vary between a Microsoft versus Google versus Meta, right? But the core is exactly the same. At the same time, I'm here to tell you that this framework actually misses something. So when it comes to solving that problem, now let's talk about the real example. Airbnb doing something during COVID. If you apply this framework, what will you miss? Just put it in chat. I think empathy, Priyanka, can be covered see, I think that the problem with this framework is everything that we come up with can be covered into one of the buckets. When you say empathy, I can say that it maps to customer needs. When you say market trends, I can say that, okay, comprehending situation can map to that. External scenarios, again, I can map it to comprehending situation. So the problem with the framework is it does not go deeper into this thing, right? But some of you have actually gotten some good sort of solution. So the one that I'll pick is, what is Airbnb's problem? And how is it different from a hotel, for example, a problem, right? So you're trying to club the industry, the normal industry in Airbnb. You're trying to see similarities, like what Airbnb is facing, are the hotels also facing that? How is it very different? And based on that difference, can we sort of comprehend the situation in a very different way as compared to like what we would have done if we would just followed the structure, right? So the structure, the problem with structure is it actually makes a very, very bookish and robotic answer. But when we go after the things that you are sort of talking about, which is macro trend, market needs, empathy, uh, COVID-based challenges, goals of the product, how Airbnb's problem ties to that product, and what is its right to win as compared to hotels, you have a much richer solution. And not because you have covered these things. I feel now you're getting it, not because you have covered these things, but because this is exactly how you'll solve this problem in a real life situation, right? This is exactly how, so the more closer you can push your product sense answer to the real life situation, the much better solution will emerge, right? So it misses those things. But so let me cover quickly one by one what it will miss, right? So the first thing it misses is, this framework misses is industry knowledge. And when it comes to industry knowledge, I think that the major challenge you have is how do you acquire these knowledge, right? So I think the way to acquire this knowledge, I think one of the good things that this person is doing, he's from Meta, ex-Meta, Satish Mama Reddy, right? So he took like different type of products and he said that let's go deeper into these different subtypes of product, right? I would say like you don't even need to go and study every subtype of product. You can actually go and think around these three things. One is the monetization models, right? And if you're not convinced, like look at how beautiful this simple video, like this simple exercise will give you a lot of insights around business models. So in this video, like Y Combinator talks about business models and 9 business models that build billion-dollar companies. And then there are like SaaS and its primary metric, takeaways, transactional, primary metrics, takeaways, marketplace, primary metric, takeaways, and then subscription, enterprise, usage, e-commerce, advertising. By the way, my eye opener while I was going through this article was advertising. So I never thought that, for example, it is very obvious once you read it, but typically these need very huge skill. So one of the things he talks about in this video is, unless you can aim to become top 20, top 30 websites across the world, advertising is not going to build you a billion-dollar business, right? So that's a very unique insight, because when you say, when we are talking about any product and you have this tendency to say that we can monetize through ads, this particular insight will come and haunt you by saying that, oh, ads, are you sure we can get to a top 20, top 30 websites across the world? No, right? So then ads are not an answer, right? Ads cannot be the core business model. The core business model can still be the marketplace model where transactions are happening and you are making money through that. And then ads are just adding to that bottom line, adding to those profits. But ads cannot be the core business model, right? And that's a much more richer discussion than saying that, okay, we can monetize through ads. If you are a 0% commission platform, we can monetize through ads. You can't monetize through ads unless you become very, very huge, right? So this is basically like you go after monetization models, you go after end users. Is it small and medium businesses, enterprise, consumers? And you go after industry, which is it a logistics industry, social media, messaging? What? If you go across these three things and try to think about various aspects, I think you'll be able to cover different industries very, very quickly, right? And you'll also be able to segment any new product that you are given in one of the particular buckets along monetization model axis, end user axis, and industry axis. These 3 axes will quickly help you in an interview determine like what is the subset of products you're talking about, right? So definitely sort of go through this. So that this basically will enrich your whole situation comprehension and customer comprehension thing, right? Then there is market knowledge. Market knowledge is basically needs, preferences, and behaviors of customers in different markets. For example, Market knowledge for Bharat is very different than market knowledge for tier 1 and metro India. And it's very different for a European consumer, where like GDPR and data privacy is very, very different from regulations point of view, as well as like people's point of view, very different from USA, very different from China, right? So unless you sort of look at how consumers across geographies sort of vary, how customers across like language and countries vary, you wouldn't be able to put things in perspective. For example, when I say that, how will Airbnb address the COVID challenge? Possibly the first question to ask and answer it, which geography do we want to focus on? Because when you're thinking about customer, you might have the tendency to say that, okay, host and guest will have this concern, host will have this concern. The problem is this challenge can be very different in Indonesia versus India versus USA, right? USA, for example, has anti-vaxxers, which is not a common thing in India. So you have to account for anti-vaxxers in USA as compared to India, right? Because these people are not vaccinated even now, possibly, right? And that insight is what Product Sense is all about, because you didn't miss a critical piece of information which was relevant for your discussion. Why? Because you are thinking of markets as not a singular customer for Airbnb or singular host for Airbnb. You are thinking of markets as different things with different traits, different behaviors and all that, right? So industry knowledge, market knowledge, these are essential for you to tackle Product Sense problems, right? So besides the framework, definitely go into industry knowledge and market knowledge, right? Now let's come to where the magic happens. Now, I think I've sort of given you some answers. So for example, like deep market knowledge and industry knowledge for sure, right? But the third is agility in the framework, which is like, can you adapt the framework to just miss onto a few things because you're like, these are not relevant. For example, prioritization is not relevant for this problem, right? I don't want to focus on prioritization. You can call that out even. I don't want to focus on prioritization because we don't have enough time to do that. But in any case, without going through the proper framework, I feel that these are the 5 things that we should be focused on. I'll give you, just give me 1 second. I think my battery is low. So I'll try to fix that. But meanwhile, agility in the framework, let's come to that. Agility in the framework comes from getting deeper into the elements of the framework, like creativity, problem solving, thinking big, leadership, data, tech, like all these things. Leadership is, I would say, you don't need leadership in Product Sense. But all these things, you need to go deeper into like the problem solving. For example, I haven't seen like any candidate talking about 5 whys in an interview, but the best candidates actually apply 5 whys in their head to actually arrive at the crux of the problem. For example, let's talk in the case of Airbnb. Just think about like few of the problems or customer needs that you're thinking about and see where 5 why can actually help you get to a much deeper problem as compared to like a superficial problem, like people don't want to wear masks or people don't wear masks when they arrive at houses, or the mask is not available when they arrive at houses. Can you think about something? So let's take a problem, right? And meanwhile, you think around it. So let's take a problem of hosts are concerned that when a particular guest leaves and the next guest arrives, it may happen that there are like the next guest might get infected because the last guest was also infected, right? So suppose like somebody was carrying an infection and it was latent. It was not very obvious. They didn't have symptoms and all. So what should Airbnb do when it comes to know that after the guest has left the Airbnb, they have developed symptoms? And symptoms usually came like 7 to 8 days after. So that means they were already infected. What should Airbnb do to contain those cases? Now, that in itself, if you go deeper into that problem, you will realize that usually has happened because that usually leads to few deeper concerns, which is like, what if the next guest who came gets infected? What if the host who came to visit or handover of keys gets infected? What if the cleaner who came got infected? And when you go deeper into that, why does this bother a particular host or Airbnb? When you go deeper into those 3 things, you have 3 solutions. First, you are recommending cleaners. You're recommending hosts to recommend to cleaners or send a video to cleaners on how to prepare themselves when they're coming to clean. You are building a feature for guests to notify back if they develop some symptoms after they left the Airbnb, right? And you're not, by the way, thinking about whether everyone will do it. At least people should have a way to tell, because COVID actually showed us that a lot of people in the world are good. They actually sort of care about other people, right? So a lot of people will do it if you build that feature. If you don't build that feature, you are anyway not going to get sort of anything out of it, right? So you created 3 things by just getting deeper into a very simple workflow, which is like, how do I avoid the next guest from getting infected? Or what happens when the guest left the Airbnb and found that they're infected, right? So this is a very simple part of the workflow that can generate such a richer discussion, which is why I say, like, if you get into the frameworks like 5 whys, fishbone diagram, and all that, which are related to problem solving, when you go to like simulation in creativity, when you go to other aspects of creativity, like blending two entirely different things in brainstorming, for example, AI and IoT, you can come with creative solutions when I say AI and IoT, right? So like there are tools to become more creative. There are tools to solve problems. There are tools to think big. There are tools to sort of become better at data and understanding metrics and becoming better at tech. So once you get deeper into these things, you can have a much richer discussion. And that is why like people keep improving their productions through mock interviews. But because your framework in itself is very flawed and is not helping you improve, you can't do much with that framework, and you keep struggling with lead PM interviews or director of product interviews or even normal like APM PM level interviews, because you're not improving yourself in terms of industry knowledge, market knowledge, and creating a more agile framework where you understand every element very, very deeply, right? So that's one thing. Now let's go into last thing, which is practice, 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 right? And then keep reading. I think these are obvious ones. But tell me this thing. Now I have a question, right? Even in practice, I would advise you to actually practice it with people who have cracked such roles. For example, if your ambition is to become an Amazon PM, do it with an Amazon PM once you're ready. Do it with a Google PM once you're ready, because they will be able to give you much more better feedback as compared to somebody who has not cracked those roles, right? So anyway, around practice, that was the one thing I wanted to call out. But let me ask. We are almost at the end of the session, so let me ask another like question related to product sense. What do you do? So for example, if I give you this problem that the mock interviews are a big problem because existing PMs don't have enough time and energy to actually do mocks with other people. So what do I do as a user if I don't find anyone to do mocks with? How do you solve that problem for me? Meanwhile, I'll read the chat. Record yourself doing it and judge yourself. That's a good solution. With some elder sibling or cousin. Find that Sharma ji ka beta or beti. Why is no one talking about Gen AI? I will give you an example, right? You folks are missing on something. Can you see my screen, by the way? Okay, 1 minute. Can you see my screen? I think this is PM exercises. It's pretty popular. Do check it if you have not checked like for some of the questions. And this is a question, right? And you have this answer. Come on, will you let me sign up? Okay, so this is the best answer, right? And this is actually, I've gone through it. It's a good answer. Suppose I take this answer. I'm like, I've created my own answer. I go through this answer and like, okay, there is a difference. And I say, the question is around COVID strategy for Airbnb for a lead PM round, lead PM products and round. By the way, this is very raw prompt. It can be a lot better. Okay. Please improve the answer. Okay. So what you'll see is, so one you can either say that improve the answer, or you can say critique the answer, in which case it says that these are the things which are right. These are the things which could have sort of improved, right? So let me actually do that. Please critique. So relevance to situation is good in this particular answer. And by the way, like, let me give you the answer. Let me take some time, right? Focus more on long-term rental, provide accommodation at reduced price, local accommodation experiences where the host can teach something online, virtual video tours, childcare facilities, right? So you get a sense of like, this is actually a good list of things, right? And then there is just like, rice and all that. And the recommendation is first two, which is like long-term rentals and accommodations at reduced price for frontline workers, which is actually good, right? Very good suggestions. Now, this talks about basically talking specific how many of Airbnb's current users are interested in local accommodation or online experiences. So, for example, the answer does not talk about quantifying like these things. For example, if you quantify what sort of frontline workers actually go to other town and need accommodation, that will sharpen the question. See, it sounds a very novel idea, but what if everybody is working locally and they don't need accommodation, right? So putting like some estimate on data around like these things can actually help you. Then what are the implications of, so suppose you finalize these two things, what are the long-term implications of going for long-term rentals versus short-term rental model, right? That's another thing. Then childcare facilities require regulatory requirements. How do you meet that? I think it's so beautiful. Like you'll see like some very unobvious things, like this regulation was never on the radar. But once you have thought about this regulation thing, tomorrow when you are suggesting something for old age care or child care, that is something which will intuitively come to your mind. So the idea is when you are trying to sort of practice, ChatGPT is possibly one of the best things to come around to help you practice this skill of product sense, because ChatGPT does very well with unstructured, ill-defined sort of areas, right? Okay. So yeah, that's more or less what I had in mind to share, right? I think we have already taken a question and discussed. We have already seen like how domain knowledge, how market knowledge sort of enriches that answer, how sort of getting deeper into one of these things or more of these things, more of the steps, and having frameworks at every stage actually helps you sort of arrive faster at an answer. And we have also seen like, how do you check if you're improving in terms of product sense? ChatGPT is a definite thing for help right now, but beyond that, you can talk to people who have already cracked these roles and they have gotten into these roles. So these were like more or less the things that I wanted to cover in our session. Now 1 hour is pretty less, but yeah, I am hoping that it actually sort of helped you. I have one more survey, which I said, definitely do the session rating right now. And what I will do is I will go after some of the Q&As, because one of the most interesting questions is what is the difference between a PM interview versus SPM interview versus lead PM interview versus DOP and all that, right? So definitely sort of go into such questions. So one interesting comment that Priyanka has is there are custom GPTs that can help with product sense and analytics, right? Priyanka, again, rather than going into these and using these custom GPTs, I would actually request you to go and see how they are built. Because see, all these custom GPTs, what they are doing is, and that will help you in understanding generative AI and like how these products are getting built. Because all they are doing is they are wrapping a prompt around the chat GPT and doing not much beyond that, right? So if you understand what is the prompt that they are adding, you can actually understand how to modify that prompt and write it for yourself. So rather than using the custom GPTs, I would say you look at how those custom GPTs are built and then try to sort of build a much better version for yourself. That one will make you more confident when it comes to Gen AI products. Two, it gives you a unique perspective around Gen AI products. For example, a simple thing like thin wrappers versus thick wrappers for Gen AI. Every PM should have opinion on like thin wrappers versus thick wrappers for Gen AI. I'm not going into detail. I think you should just go and Google these things out, but understand like how these are being built and what are the limitations of these products that you're using. I think Sanchari has this pretty good question. I didn't think because written answers and oral performances are very different. Gen AI can help, but it can't audition you. So Sanchari, like that's a very good thing. In fact, I would advise in the first few weeks of this product sense interview or enhancement exercise, you actually should slow down. Just slow down, try to write it out, try to solve it yourself. And even if you take like half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, it's fine. The first thing is to actually sort of think more long and hard around like some of the problems that you're solving. It's exactly like maths, right? Which is like, or like writing essays. Once you have written essays, initially like it will take you 4 hours, 5 hours, but over time you try to build a mental model and you can then start doing speed practice. Same for chess, right? In chess, like you start by playing very slow 2 hour, 3 hour games. And ultimately you graduate to say that I can just do a 10 minutes game, right? So don't go for speed chess at the initial days of like product sense interview prep. First try to write, first try to analyze, first try to understand. And then of course the practicing will help you with, auditioning and all. So that is where the mock interviews can happen. I think one very good question, I'll go to that question now. What's the difference in expectation of product sense for a PM, SPM, lead PM role? So Rituraj, again, let's go back to the key thing that we said. The difference in product sense interviews arises from the fact that the role expectation and the company expectation are different. So to answer this question, you can also think around what does a PM do by using product sense that a SPM that is different from a SPM or for a product lead. So a PM is supposed to make good decisions around reviewing designs, good decision around which feature to build, and so on and so forth, right? And how to build that feature. So they're more around how and execution, whereas a SPM is supposed to provide the solution for a particular problem that is given to them. Versus a product lead is supposed to come up with a roadmap. How does it tie to company goals and all that? So lead role is much more, I would say, closer to product strategy and product sense actually blend together. Versus a PM role is more about like following a framework and thinking on the feet in that 30 minutes and all that, right? So that's one key difference on how these roles are different and why the expectation for you in product sense round is just like building good solutions versus figuring out a problem and a solution versus basically tying it back to the company and sort of then saying that whether this makes sense or not. Product lead also is around a lot more around regulatory compliance and all those things you have to cover in product lead role, which is not very obvious in a PM or SPM role. The second part of difference arises from the fact that to actually make a decision in a lead role, you need to understand industry and competition and everything very, very deeply. So what we covered, that your industry knowledge, your market knowledge and all should be super when it comes to actually cracking a product lead role in companies like Google, Meta, or a director, senior director, VP role in startups, right? That should be superb. Versus a PM or SPM, you can do well with structured thinking, by articulating it well, by solving the problem in 30 minutes, by sort of prioritizing things and making trade-offs, right? But the level of those trade-offs, the considerations in those trade-offs are much more richer in a lead PM role or a VP of a product in a startup role as compared to a PM or SPM role. So that's basically the difference. Think of the difference in roles and you will come up with the difference in like products and rounds. One can also ask GPT as an interviewer. Yes. Yes, I think GPT is good at doing back and forth. In fact, counseling sessions and all, it's pretty good at as a like psychotherapist also. So it does very well when you actually give it prompt to do a Q&A. I sometimes struggle with prioritization criteria. Shifia has asked this. So Shifia, when you say prioritization, it's usually arises from the fact that you don't understand what matters to user or company well. So rather than thinking of a prioritization thing, start thinking about, does it matter for the company and users both? If it matters, and it matters because of XYZ, that should be a higher priority. If it doesn't, that should be a lower priority. Once you have thought around that, then RISE or any other framework makes a lot of sense. Because see, company user ke liye, you want to reach the company wants to reach maximum number of users and create impact there, which is why reach is important. Impact has to be deeper because between a feature which has lower impact versus a higher impact, I'll pick higher impact. But things get complex if the impact is higher for a small set of users versus impact is medium for a large set of users, right? So no matter which decision you take in the interview, it actually does not matter unless the confidence and estimations are widely different for these two options. So RISE, like you don't see, I think you're putting too much pressure on yourself is my belief. When you're thinking that my prioritization should be awesome and like should not be debatable, your prioritization will be debatable, at least in an interview setup. Don't worry about that. Worry about tackling these questions ki like, why does this feature matter for a company or for the user, right? And look at the lens of reach, impact, confidence, effort, basically cost versus benefit, and you should be good. Even if you take like 1 as 2 and 2 as 1, people don't mind because they understand that, okay, you have at least thought around like the basic framework is correct, which is like you're thinking about the user, you're thinking about the company. Your assumptions can be corrected by your manager or leadership or somebody else. So you don't have to worry about that. Abhishek has this question: how do we know the feedback we receive is genuine and not the AI hallucinating? That's a good question, Abhishek. But to be honest, like, see, most of these questions that we ask, right, these are not factual. Like, how would Airbnb so see, ChatGPT is very good for questions where you somewhere like know the right versus wrong answers, right? For example, the childcare facility thing it mentioned, you would rather go and check it whether like US has some regulation around it, India has some regulation around it. So that is the due diligence you should do. But as long as you are able to separate the fact versus maybe versus a total lie, which in case of product interviews is easy to separate, I think you'd be good. And anyway, you are trying to see what all you missed in your answers, which means that you don't have to care about everything that GPT says. You have to care about things that you read and you're like, oh, I should have thought this. This actually makes sense. I knew this, but somewhere like I didn't think about it while writing the answer, right? So go for like high confidence parts of the answer that ChatGPT gives you, right? Don't go for like the fringes and all, because otherwise like you'll always become underconfident because ChatGPT will find 1 or 2 things which are wrong with your answer. But look for like big misses that you had in your answer. And those big misses usually are not hallucinations, number one. Number two, if they are hallucinations, you will know. Number three, you have a way of verifying those big rocks. And then there is perplexity, yes. So use perplexity also because it actually quotes sources and all. Upasna has this question: which publications, newsletters, blogs do you usually read in order to get tech market industry knowledge? So if you're looking at big tech, you read like Stratechery. I'll just put it in. Again, this is a paid publication. If you're looking to sort of read around startups in India, you can try the Ken. I'm not a big fan, but still like it serves the purpose. And I think those two are the things that I read regularly. Beyond that, like just like keep following some newsletters which write around industry, But Strategy and the Ken give you a good sense of what is happening in big tech and what is happening in startups in India. Beyond that, you can read like TechCrunch. TechCrunch is a pretty reliable source of startups and everything in tech. You can read Recode. However, I don't read Recode that regularly, just making a disclaimer. Wired you can read, yes. Wired you can read. You can also read some of the VC blogs. So these VC venture capitalists actually publish like industry reports and all. Those you can read, right? And so VC blogs, and then finally you can also go after these ENY report or like these consulting reports that they publish every year around markets. For example, ENY publishes one around retail market in India and all. So there is a lot to read. Just be sure that you're not reading it from, you're not reading news. You are actually reading analysis. So news versus analysis, I think, is very, very important to keep in mind to become a good PM with a product sense. If you keep reading news, you'll have very superficial level information, a lot of information in your head, but it will get you nowhere. You'll know a lot of things, but so does like everybody who reads a newspaper. So don't read news, read analysis, read blogs that actually sort of are not just sharing information. They are actually analyzing something, and a good litmus test for that is actually like the longer the post is, the more are the chances of analysis and all that. Inc 42, again, it's a news website. So that's what I mean to say, that don't read news a lot. Yes, I think Devanjali said it very, very well. I think there is one more question. How should one structure one's PM journey? Goal is to start developing products and to maybe 7-10 years becoming a full stack PM. Ashish, that's a very long answer and a long question. I would say take one step at a time. Try to see product sense is a 7 to 10 years journey and even more. So don't start on that journey today. And the full stack PM, see, you will realize that you have to specialize in something to build a lot of power in your career, in the sense that you are highly valued in the industry and all that. So in 7 to 10 years, like you can go via generalist route if you are starting the jobs today. But if you already are in a 5 year, like you have 5 years, 6 years of experience, I would say try to focus on few industries to start with, and then try to focus on 1 or 2 industries to actually focus and become very good at that, right? Don't try to go via like a very, very generalist route, because over time, like the industry highly values people who have built specialization in 1 or 2 industries, right? So two things, right? One is like build generalist skills, which is more around product sense and all, data and all that. But after that, like try to pick few industries and try to go deeper into those industries by building product in those. Chintan has this question. You mentioned intentional design choice when discussing good practices. Can you elaborate what you exactly mean by that? So Chintan, what it means is, so think of it like this. For example, if I am designing this button for Airbnb, right, which takes feedback from the guest. After 7 days, a guest has checked out, or let's say after 3 days, a guest has checked out, it sort of asks them a simple question, ki, have you developed any symptoms or not? And the design choices at that point can be, we can send a notification. We can send a sticky notification, which does not go away unless the user has actually answered. Or we can just build a button in the homepage of the Airbnb app, which people can come and do it themselves. What is the choice you are making? All three are good designs, by the way. But the intentional design is basically coming from the insight on how important is it for us to take this feedback. So one PM might argue for saying that we need to send sticky notifications while also having a place in the app to give this feedback, right? Because this is a time sensitive information. Whereas another PM can say that we don't want to sort of bother people, and we can just send a notification and have a place for them to come in and out. Anyway, if people want it, they will do it. If they don't want it, they will lie, right? So that is basically, this is one example of the balance between intrusiveness versus actually getting the info that is very critical for humanity even, and very critical for host and the follow-up guests, right? So then this is where like the discussion happen around intentional design, right? But this is one example. There are like other facets of intentional design. It's basically what are the trade-offs you make when it comes to user experience design, right? And are you opinionated in some way, right? Because the follow-up question you can get is, but why not become intrusive? Because this is such a high risk thing. And then you have to answer that question. If you have not thought about that answer, it's very hard for you to sort of give a very opinionated intentional design choice. Pranay has this question, one question that got lost above resharing. How can one gauge quickly whether product culture is right for you just from interview process? So Pranay, like, I think one of the one of the habits you need to build is, just like a company checks sort of referral around you, you should also try to sort of talk to existing people in the company. After like you have finished the interviews and you have gotten an offer, you should try to talk to people to make that decision. And by the way, when somebody says, why are you checking on us and all, suppose like it got to that place, you can always say that I don't want to land in a situation where I waste your time. Because see, ultimately, like people who are mature understand ki if the fit is not there, if you're trying to evaluate fit, it's important both for company and the candidate. It's not just for candidates. It's not just you who is making a decision for yourself. It will be good for company as well. So in fact, like companies help you do that. In fact, like you can, there are people at least in Silicon Valley who ask for references. Who are the people I can talk to in your company to know it better, right? So of course, like the company can name good people who are very, very happy with the company. That said, like you can always gauge their value system and how does things work in that conversation. Rather than focusing on hypothetical question, you can always ask, how do we ship products here? What was the last product we shipped? What was the last product that failed after we shipped, and what was the reaction around it? Those can be sugar coated, but the answer will more or less, like across 2 or 3 such interviews, will give you the reality. And of course, you can always do indirect checks, which is sort of a referral check, reference check. So do that. And this is your career, right? So you should spend a lot of time in making this decision. That's one of the mistakes possibly like I have made at a couple of instances. So yeah, I would say like don't make that mistake. Priyanka has this question. You mentioned tools to get good at deeper elements of framework. We talked about tech, but any thoughts about creativity, problem solving, data? Yeah, Priyanka, like that's the goal I'm planning to solve using like product sense and strategy program, right? Which is more of a like real program, because see, to solve these like creativity, problem solving, data and all, you need to go deeper into it. And when you go deeper into it, it also impacts your real job performance when it comes to product sense, as well as your interview performance, right? So if it were easy, like anybody would have done it. Frameworks are easy, so everybody is doing that. But yeah, for this, like somebody needs to sit and create a syllabus for PMs. And that is exactly the thing that I'm trying to do with product sense and strategy program. So hopefully in a couple of months, we will know how well it helps PMs as we sort of close our first cohort. I think that would be all.